From our local studio right here, the Channel 3 studios, welcome to the return of Friday Night Frenzy. I'm Joe Zone. The high school winter sports season starts this Monday. Now, just to be able to say that is remarkable. The thought of playing any indoor sports seemed pretty remote just 2 months ago. Joining me tonight is Sean Patrick Bowley of Game Time CT, Joe Morelli from Game Time CT and Hearst Media, and Dr. Karissa Neihoff, the Executive Director of the National Federation of High Schools. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Now, if I were going to write a book about 2020, it would be titled, I don't know. I've never done this before. Karissa, I'll start with you. 10 months ago, we didn't know anything about playing sports in the pandemic. Who could play, how we could play, what we could play. But you have learned a lot the last year, and enough that earlier this week, the National Association changed its guidelines. Tell us more.
Well, great to see you, Joe, and thank you for inviting me on. We have learned a lot, and just this past week, our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee that's been watching things play out across the country for the last 10 months revised its guidance document to move away from tiering sports simply based on prospective low, moderate, or high risk to really looking at risk mitigation strategies as the area of emphasis applied to sports across the board. So we're hoping that this can free up some thinking and some planning. As long as risk mitigation is the priority, we hope that kids can get back to play.
One of the things I want to know, and guys, you can jump in anytime you like, because I know you got your own questions, but can you specifically tell us, without speaking for the CIAC, what that could mean, though, here in Connecticut, those changes?
Well, sure. From our office in Indianapolis to any office, state association office, if our guidance can be of assistance, because it's based on what we've seen nationwide in states that have played both indoor and outdoor sports, based on mental health research that we have, and based on COVID-19 transmission data that we've gathered from states where they have played. We're hoping that we can provide some information that can help to inform sports medicine advisory committees, state association offices, even legislative offices, if we can be of service in that capacity.
Joe, Sean, any question you might have before I throw out the next one? Go ahead.
Dr. Neihoff, how delicate has the balance been between the safety everybody has to have in the pandemic versus the kids dying to play who've missed 2 to 3 straight seasons, and people who have been depressed and worse from these kids?
Yeah, so we've really tried to keep a broad perspective on both the impact of COVID regarding playing and not playing. And what we've seen nationwide over the last 10 months is that sports themselves, when risk mitigation factors are in place, are not proving to be spreader events. So when we're talking about masking, social distancing, sanitation practices, ventilation in indoor facilities, or playing outdoors when possible, when those things are in place, we've seen all number of sports be played, and we're not seeing data that sport transmission is traced back to sport participation. If so, it's been very rare. And this is nationwide. We're also monitoring the impact from the mental and emotional wellness perspective. A study out of Wisconsin showed remarkably higher rates of self-reported anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and reported loss of quality of life. So we really want to approach the scholastic age group with a broader perspective on why participation matters and what the impact is if our kids are not participating.
Doctor, do you think and this is an easy second guess for us who cover this, do you think if we had this information that we know now, if we had it back in, say, September, that maybe football would have been played in more places around the country, including here in Connecticut?
You know, it's always hard to look back, but I think if we knew what we know now back in September, we probably would not have been as concerned about contact surface transmission. We would have known a little more about aerosol transmission. And we just unfortunately did not have any data going into the fall season. We did our best in terms of guessing based on CDC information, the USOPC, looking at the NCAA, tried to stay in alignment with medical expertise, but we've been watching carefully, and we know a little more now. So we do encourage risk mitigation, of course, first and foremost, but then when possible, we think we would love to see kids being able to play.
Joe, Sean, you want to take a shot? I know you've.
Yeah, Karissa, how much did the concerns about some of the states have been doing different things about, whether high risk sports or not? Some states decided they were going to play regardless of how high risk were. Some DPHs were comfortable with that. Here in Connecticut, obviously that wasn't the case. Football, it was a big deal. I mean, I know here lacrosse is really big. How much did the concerns over lacrosse play into your guys' decision to make this for your medical board to make the changes that they did as far as the risk factors go?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I'll be fully transparent. No one sport influenced our decision at all. Our Sports Med Advisory Committee has to look at 20 plus sports. So they knew if we were going to be looking at lacrosse and perhaps moving it from a higher tier to a moderate tier, we would need to look at all sports and weigh the factors. What our Sports Med Advisory Committee did was actually take data that was recently captured about participation, combine it with anecdotal information that we've received from all 50 states and DC, and also look at the mental emotional health. So that all combined with a multiple day sports med meeting. And I think they did what was terrific. They looked at everything and combined that with what we knew. So we tried very hard not to be influenced by one sport versus any other. We try to be an organization that is apolitical, if you will, and really evidence-based in our decision-making with a good dose of common sense based on what we know is good for kids and, again, as evidence-based as possible.
All right, Dr.
Neihoff. How about the timing of it, actually?
Go ahead, Sean.
Go ahead. No, I'm sorry. How about the timing of it? I mean, this is something the original plan had been to do it in May. It was last May, and now we're far into the winter season, and some of the states were really kind of banking on those risk assessments. And I don't know. Just what about the timing of it? Do you think they may have come to the decision a little too late, or what was the decision behind that?
Oh, yeah, great question. Some people might say, well, what took you so long? Actually, the spring sports that were sidelined are a lot of outdoor sports. We really, in our sports med committee, we met in October, and they just didn't have enough football data that was coming in, indoor volleyball. We certainly didn't have basketball or wrestling happening at that time. So it may seem like it's been many months in the making, but actually we really didn't wrap up football seasons. In fact, Michigan was the last that had played a season into the new year until January 23rd. So it really took us into January to have enough data to make a decision at the sports med meeting that really took into account. We have volleyball, field sports from the fall. We have football. We've got some basketball, some wrestling. We really needed to see those sports before we could make a significant transition in our guidance document.
Dr. Neihoff, thanks for joining us tonight, staying up late. And I'll be talking to you again soon on something else. Sean and Joe, we'll have more with you guys coming up in just a few